Methane is leaking all over the place. Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City to Washington, D.C. Our internet website is thestruggle.org and our YouTube channel is Struggle Video Media. Today, a major strike in New Jersey, talks in Philadelphia about the climate crisis, and images from a very large anti-fracking demonstration and march just before the Democratic National Convention. We start with a month-long strike in Atlantic City, New Jersey at the Trump Taj Mahal Hotel owned by billionaire Carl Icahn. Around 1,000 workers are on strike. It's kind of quiet around the hotel casino Trump Taj Mahal. No maids, housekeepers, bartenders, cocktail servers, cooks, bellmen, doormen, or other workers are working. Just managers pretending they know what they're doing. It's quiet except for the members of Unite Here Local 54 who picket and ask customers to stay away. They've been out since July 1st. The union did settle contracts with 5 other hotels, including one owned by Icahn, but the workers have rejected his crappy offers at the Trump Taj Mahal.
Well, the owner won't give us a decent contract, which every other casino in the city has. We tried to negotiate a contract with him before the strike, and the health care he offered us was horrible. Some of the workers here have been 2 years without health insurance since Carl Icahn went to a bankruptcy judge, and the bankruptcy judge said it was okay for him to take away our health care. I was hired as a seasonal employee in the buffet, and I worked 2 nights before the strike started. But I believe...
You're from Atlantic City, your family?
My mom and dad were born and raised in Atlantic City, and I live the next town over. And my dad helped build this building back in 1980s, late 80s, early 90s. He was a union man for 38 years, and my brother was union for 30.
The big issues that caused this strike was that 22 months ago, Carl Icahn put Taj Mahal into bankruptcy, and they stripped us of all of our benefits. We have no pension, no severance, no health care. The housekeepers were doing 16 rooms, overworked. Subcontracting was still on the table. What caused this strike was the contract negotiations had broke down. We had extensions on all the contracts, and they ran out. So once we come to the bargaining table, Caesars settled their contract. Bally settled their contract. Harris settled their contract. Tropicana settled their contract, which is also owned by Carl Icahn. When I came here to Taj Mahal to our last negotiating session before we went on strike on July the 1st, their last proposal was that they would stop deducting our half-hour break. The housekeeping, they would reduce them back to 14 credits. And also, they gave us a health care package that wasn't sufficient enough to take care of our families. It only covered me.
Let me stop you for a second.
Yes.
You say they have no health care benefits right now?
No health care benefits right now. We haven't had health care benefits for 22 months.
What about Obamacare? Isn't that required?
It is required, but they deducted our break out of our check and give us a $38 stipend. $38 does not cover enough when you're working part-time. You're getting partial unemployment during the winter. That's how we were working around here. Now we just went back to full-time just before we went on strike. But what they offered us was a portion of the health care coverage that everyone has here in the city. Theirs is fully funded. Okay, they got concessions going forward. They gave them bonuses. They're still going into steps. I haven't had but an 80-cent raise in the last 12 years, and that's over the last 12 years.
You repeat that again?
I have not had a raise for the last 12 years. It's been 80 cents, but it's been spread out over the last 12 years.
And prices, of course, have gone up plenty.
Of course, the living's going up. Everything's going up. Property and real estate here in the city is going up. A lot of these workers work part-time during the winter, So the Obamacare doesn't work for them. They are on state subsidies, okay, when they can be taken care of here. Just all we want is a fair contract so we can go to work like the other casinos. Carl Icahn refused to give us a fair and decent contract, but he gave one to his sister property, Tropicana, but he won't do it here at Taj Mahal.
Now, we're not objective. We are supporting the unions and the workers. So tell us how can people help?
How can people help? Well, first there's a boycott campaign going on here at Taj Mahal. Do not frequent Taj Mahal, okay, until he settles up a contract.
So don't go into the hotel at all?
Don't go into the hotel at all. All it does, that helps the workers stand a little bit stronger, okay?
Do you invite people to come and join the lines with you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We're getting support from state senators. Hillary Clinton was here on the line with us, okay? She came out to the picket line. We were supporting Bernie Sanders when he came down because he's about the 1% getting theirs, not taking care of the working class here in America.
This sign is a memorial to Esa Ivan Madrid, who died during the strike. On the union website, in its tribute to the late 62-year-old dishwasher, you read this sentence. Esa had a health condition which required regular medical attention, which was unaffordable to him after the Trump Taj Mahal took away health care 20 months ago. A note about Carl Icahn. Forbes magazine says he's worth $17 billion. Either he worked a ton of overtime to make that much money, or he figured out a way to reap the money made by thousands and thousands of people who actually did work time and overtime. Icahn can't afford to pay. Finally, we hope the strike ends in victory soon. Keep your eye on these websites to see when it's okay to go back to the Trump Taj Mahal. As climate scientist Robert Howarth estimates, if we continue down the present path, methane, principally from fracking, will push the world over the 1.5 degrees centigrade barrier in 13 years. After that, feedback loops start sending things to hell. Thousands gathered in Philadelphia just before the Democratic Convention to try to drive home that message. First in a conference in the historic Free Quaker Meeting House, and on the next day on the streets during a broiling 95-degree day. On July 23rd, the Summit for a Clean Energy Revolution included a panel called Peace and Climate Justice. We'll have speakers on this show and the next from that panel.
So, violence can be divided into three categories: self-inflicted, interpersonal, and intergroup. Intergroup is also what we refer to as collective violence. It turns out that climate change increases the chances of all forms of violence, but for the purposes of our talk today, I'm going to focus on the concept of collective violence only. I'll discuss how human-induced global climate change is a catalyst for all these forms of violence, including war, armed conflict, state-sponsored violence such as genocide or torture, and organized violent crimes such as gang warfare. The fundamental reason that climate change leads to conflict is that it causes environmental scarcity. Environmental scarcity, what is it? It is tied to three factors. It is tied to diminishing natural resources, like forests and drinking water, fresh water, diminishing human security, such as ethnic clashes, and diminished societal stability, such as urban unrest. With environmental scarcity, every right that is stated in the Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is threatened. Examples of these rights are adequate standards of living for well-being, for food, And as a public health professional, it is important to stress how collective violence causes injury, illness, disability, and death. Furthermore, when health supporting infrastructure of societies break down, vulnerable populations suffer the most. Therefore, climate change is a cause of collective violence and therefore a societal and public health threat. Okay? Now let's go into a little bit more details about that. Beginning in the 1950s, an age began that we call the Anthropocene age, age of Anthropocene. This period is not just in the name, it's actually clearly marked in the geological changes that we see in the layers of Earth. The proliferation of chemical pollutants and rising greenhouse gases have changed the planet, have altered the planet since the 1950s, and these changes are studied in relation to incidents of violence around the globe. This is actually a very hot area of research. So let us take each climate event and look at its relation with violence and conflict. So from the 1950s to 2004, in the tropics, during the El Nino years, the probability of new civil conflict went up by 3 to 6% each time there was an El Nino. And therefore, since that time, El Ninos have influenced the development of civil conflict by a total of 21%, 1 out of 5. Next example, drought. That's a well-known example of extreme weather event that is rising with severity and frequency as the Earth's temperatures rise. In Somalia, from 1997 to 2009, the drought that led to the instability in the prices of livestock and crop failure was a fundamental contributor to the internal conflict and famine that followed and lasted for decades in that country. In many other parts of the world that receive an average amount of rainfall, every time there's a decrease in rainfall or excessive rainfall, we also call excessive precipitation, there is a rise in violence in the following year. Globally, between 1960 and 2007, there were 121 just water-related conflicts, with the annual frequency rising in the later years. It may seem as if it's not easy to link climate change to what is generally seen as a politically induced event. But there have been many, many studies. In summary, there have been 60 longitudinal studies and at least 50 quantitative studies with meta-analyses of all of them. And they all show that deviation from normal weather patterns lead to increases in intergroup conflict. This correlation between extreme weather and violence is 14 to 50% stronger in poorer populations. In 2009, the United Nations Refugee Agency estimated that 20 million people have been forced to move by factors related to climate change, mainly due to storms and floods. They estimated that by 2050, there may be between 50 to 250 million climate refugees. And remember from the graph during the noontime, 2050 is before we even get to that 2-degree rise in temperature. Of the 4 causes of forced migration is what we were just talking about. They include political instability, economic tensions, ethnic conflict, and environmental degradation. 3 of them are directly or indirectly brought about by climate change. In other words, climate change drives forced migration not only due to collective conflict, but because of environmental changes, such as sea level rise, droughts, flooding, and other extreme weather events. And it does that because it destroys housing, jobs, and security. Forced migrants are less likely to have access to safe food, water, sanitation, medical care, and public health services. Rising sea levels also impact 1/5 of the world population that live in coastal areas, such as low-lying island nations like the Marshall Islands, or densely populated coastal regions like Bangladesh. I got you. As the sea levels rise, Saltwater incursion into bodies of fresh water damages crops and renders drinking water unsafe. That is what's happening in the bayou regions of states such as Louisiana. In total, around the globe, 162 million people are at risk of forced migration due to sea level rise. In summary, collective violence due to climate change poses multiple serious threats to health and human rights. While as a developed nation, the United States produces the highest per capita greenhouse gas emissions, it is the rest of the world that feels the impact. In fact, the burden of this impact falls on non-combatant civilians, vulnerable populations, and poorer people. This is the highest form of climate injustice. Here in Philadelphia, we live in the temperate part of the United States, and the impacts of climate change are perhaps not seen as severely as the rest of the world. But according to reports by Philadelphia Mayor's Office, this city is destined to become much hotter and much wetter in the future. These are the very events that lead to increased violence and forced migration in other parts of the world and the country. To prevent collective violence and its adverse health effects and protect human rights, we must, as a global nation, that drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, transition to clean renewable sources of energy, and raise public awareness about the impacts of climate change. Thank you very much.
I'm going to try to do this without the mic. Raise your hand in the back if you can't hear me. You heard Ed speak about the climate of refugees, and for me, I was in Paris at COP21. I met Nigel from the Solomon Islands. Nigel's island was being swamped by the ocean. He was losing his home, and for me, that made the issue very real. Sometimes we have to have these personal encounters for these issues to become real, and at that time, it did become real. And it became real when I came back and I read about Louisiana and the island that we're losing there, and our own refugees there. These people are our brothers and sisters, and we need to have compassion for them. And I know all of you here do have deep compassion for them. This is real, and you all know this is real. I want to just tell you my own story. You heard Alicia say that I was pro-fracking, and so I ran a manufacturing plant. I was a metal manufacturer. And I came up with a brilliant idea about 10 years ago of converting from oil, one fossil fuel, to the other fossil fuel, gas. I bought into the propaganda, and it was easy to buy into that propaganda because you looked at that little blue flame and there were no emissions. The Sierra Club bought into that propaganda. Lots of people bought into that propaganda. And then we began the film, Groundswell Rising, and I woke up. I did the research, and you can't do the research and remain pro-fracking. It's impossible to do the research and remain pro-fracking. But what this means for me personally is that I spent over $200,000 10 years ago, near $300,000 in today's dollars on fossil fuels. I don't have that money to spend on alternative fuels now. I'm a microcosm. This is what is happening on the planet. They're building export facilities. They're building pipelines. Once they build those things, they don't have the money to spend on fossil fuels. So it's not a question of whether we should or should. We can't. It's got to stay in the ground, and we have to stop the infrastructure. We got to stop the infrastructure. One of the things, by the way, I came back from Paris with a very, very heightened sense of urgency about the climate crisis. I mean, my sense of urgency before Paris was about here, and when I came back, it was, maybe at the ceiling. And so I still hear us using the word climate change, and that's actually, I think that's a Republican term. I think about using the word climate crisis, because isn't that really what it is? I mean, wouldn't that help wake us up if we began to use the word climate crisis? One of the things that I wonder about, what is it going to take to wake this nation up? We haven't awakened yet. I think there's a deficiency of empathy in our nation. There's a deficiency of empathy, and I think for some people, not in this room, I don't believe in this room, but for some people, some politicians, they're going to have the water literally lapping at their toes before they wake up. I don't have a solution to that, but that is the truth of that's the consciousness that we're dealing with. And this is the consciousness that we see reflected in the Republican Party platform that is recommending that we withdraw from the Paris Accord. There's never been an issue more critical to humankind. And I want to continue the World War II analogy which I just started here. Recently, I met a young man who's going to MIT, first year in MIT, and I said, I'm talking to you about recruiting people. Look around you. How many 18, 19, 20-year-olds, the new millennium, how many are here? We need to recruit them. So I said to him, don't make my smartphone smarter. Don't make my computer faster. Fix the climate crisis. How are we going to go out and recruit? How are we going to go out and recruit these people? It's Saturday. They should be here. It's Saturday. They should be here. Some of you are here. So I celebrate the ones of you that are here. Thank you for being here. Yeah, there you go. But there needs to be more of you. There needs to be more of you.
On July 24th, 5,000 to 10,000 people marched on a sweltering day from Philadelphia's City Hall in an anti-fracking march. Here's one short interview we did before the march began.
So why did you come down today?
Well, we came over all the way from Long Beach, California, and Long Beach 350 is part of 350.org, which, as you know, is an international climate organization. We have a local affiliate in Long Beach, but we were willing to come all the way over here to Philadelphia because we thought with the convention going on, this would be a good time for us to contribute our voice and just lift it up and say, look, we're done with fossil fuels. Fracking is like maybe the worst of them, but we want them all kept in the ground. Keep it in the ground. So that's our message today.
Greg, could you hold up your sign?
Sure. I got two of them. You want to see both of them?
We have video of the march, which we'll show next week. Right now, a narrated view of some of the signs and banners from the march. Methane is leaking all over the place. The sign says no frac sands mining. Solar, an obvious alternative to burning fossil fuels. There's also a move to cut back or eliminate animal agriculture, which releases a lot of methane. The group Code Pink had a vigorous delegation. War is not green. From a Jewish environmental group. A solar sign, where there's a ray, there's a way. Note the shirt worn in solidarity with the Atlantic City casino strike. Clean Energy Revolution was the main march banner. There was a strong Native American showing in the protest. American Indians have been struggling to keep pipelines off their land. It's a major challenge to create green jobs. Here they recycle a line from an old song sung by Pete Seeger. Pennsylvania is ground zero for fracking smack dab in the Marcellus Shale country. Marchers right from that area. MarcellusAwareness.com from Western PA. Lots of youth get it. They're the ones facing climate catastrophe. California against fracking. From Lancaster, Pennsylvania, this quilt against fracking. A detail of one of the quilt panels. Some of the many people who came down from Connecticut. The message, "Stop dirty energy." Pledging allegiance to clean energy. Ban fracking, the march's theme. Connecticut is just one state preparing to spend billions on those pipelines. Coal, oil, methane must be left in the ground. Many signs oppose the TPP trade treaty for its effects on climate. A number of signs were anti-war. After all, the Pentagon is the biggest fossil fuel user. And U.S. wars seem to so often center around control of oil and gas fields. These are trade unionists who are able to look a few years ahead and see the need to transition to green jobs. A terrific point with this sign. $500 billion are given to the fossil fuel industry in subsidies every year. Marxist support for the march, and Uncle Sam too. The banks did get bailed out, so far nix for the climate. The New Jersey forget about it anti-fracking sign. Those unable to march took part on this anti-fracking bus ride. More about the Summit for a Clean Energy Revolution on next week's show. What did I take away from the weekend? In 13 years, we break through the global warming barrier and into a time of climate catastrophe. It's time to panic. It's time to act. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.